The number of people forcibly displaced has continued to rise over the last 10 years and is now reaching 18 million. To make matters even worse, the COVID 19 pandemic has sparked a crisis of global magnitude, and infodemic, a word coined by the WHO, has become a buzzword. These culminating crises have further aggravated the refugee situation. In 2020, more than ever, reliable, unbiased information can save lives.
Hello and welcome to day 10, which is also the last day of the DW Akademie's first virtual conference on communication, engagement, and accountability. I'm Wanjiko Mwaura.
And I am Eddie Micah Jr. Once again, we are your moderators in what has been a fantastic 2 week ride. And I'm sure Wanjiku definitely agrees with it. There's been interesting times, Wanjiku, right?
Totally.
Totally. Now, we've been around the world. We've been joined by experts in Jordan, Ecuador. Well, actually, I think I'm jumping into what you're supposed to say, Wanjiku. Let me take it back and wrap up exactly what we've been doing. We've been around the world, talked to many experts, and listened to refugees and members of the host community.
That's right, Eddie. And you are not wrong because we are not done yet after this incredible 2 week ride. Today, we'll take another tour around the globe. In just a few minutes, we will be joined by experts in Jordan, Ecuador, and Mexico who will talk about how to enable migrants to be seen and heard in the host communities.
Definitely looking forward to that. And I'm sure if you're watching us now, you're definitely looking forward to that too. As always, you can join a Q&A session with our experts right after the discussion. You guys have been very interactive so far. Now, just to give you an idea of how interactive we've all been through the app, the community has sent more than 1,700 private and public messages on this app. Now, that is impressive, Wanjiku.
Absolutely. And I just want to send an invitation right now. Perhaps it's possible for us to hang out on the app after today's session. Just let's keep in touch because networking is not over. The app will stay open for the next 6 months for you to engage with our experts and other participants as well. And of course, you can also watch the recorded sessions. So please go check it out.
Definitely go check it out. Now, something else we should definitely go check out is today's program. We will now be joined by Lorenzo Vargas, that's the program manager at the World Association for Christian Communication.
And Lorenzo will introduce us to his colleagues and guide us through the different projects that WACC is supporting. Lorenzo, the stage is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this meeting. My name is Lorenzo Vargas, and I work as a program manager with the World Association for Christian Communication. And I'm very pleased to be here with you to talk about migration and communication rights. So perhaps we can go by going into the next slide. And I'll begin by telling you a little bit about what WACC does. We are an international organization that works to promote communication rights. And in practice, that means empowering people who are left out of media structures, who are often not seen and heard because of lack of access, because of unaffordable media platforms, because of limitations to freedom of expression or access to information, to actually have their voices and their stories heard and seen in media. So in the context of migration, WACC, and we can go to the next slide if you don't mind. WACC has been working in this area for several years now. But in essence, we have a program that we call the Communication Rights and Migration Program, which promotes the idea that migrants have a right to be heard and be seen in their host societies. And in order to do that, we support a number of organizations around the world through technical support and financial support to create initiatives that enable migrants to exercise their communication rights. And that could take a number of forms. It could be programs that promote the access to information among migrants or the right to freedom of expression, but also a broader take, which is the need for migrants to be listened, to be heard, to engage in dialogue with others, as well as to enable migrants to partner with media organizations and develop connections with media organizations so that they can better, advance a more balanced representation of their own stories. So in that context, we're going to be sharing with you a number of experiences from around the world. As you mentioned earlier, there are experiences from 3 countries in particular, from Mexico, from Ecuador, and from Jordan. So we will be starting with my friend and colleague, Daoud Kuttab at the Community Media Network of Jordan. And he has been working on a program to enable Syrian refugees in Jordan to have their own radio show through the community radio network there in order to engage in dialogue with their communities and change perceptions. So I'll hand it over to Daoud now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo, and thank you, Deutsche Welle, for this Academy for this opportunity. Back in March 2011, a civil war broke out in Syria, which is a country north of Jordan, and some of the civil war, the internal fighting was in the southern part of Syria. And so as a result, refugees started to migrate from Syria to Jordan. And Jordan is a country with about 6 to 7 million people. And within a very short period of time, over 1 million Syrian refugees appeared on Jordanian grounds. Can we start the video now? And as a result of that, we noticed that, of course, UNHCR and other refugee organizations started to help create refugee hubs. So we have one of the biggest refugee camps in the world in the Zaatari camp. And by now, there's about 1.3 million refugees and roughly nearly 20% of jump in the population of Jordan, which is now stands about 10 million people, a country that has very little natural resources. And so it was very difficult to deal with the situation. And of course, there was a big question about what's the status. Are these refugees? Are they visitors? Jordan is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention. And therefore, it was very difficult to figure out what the rights are and what is the actual name of the people who are, Jordanians call them our visitors, our neighbors, but they needed a legal status. And so as you can see from the video that is being shown now, many lived in these refugee camps, but many lived outside. In fact, of the 1.3 million Syrians in Jordan, only 20% live in regulated refugee camps. The rest live in with the population. Naturally, the beginning of the conflict, the number one cause was a humanitarian cause. Everybody wanted to make sure that the Syrians received the food and the medicine and the basic housing structure that they needed, especially in the winter months. But as you can imagine, soon thereafter, the issue of humanitarian aid needed to have other things. As Jesus said, man shall not live by bread alone. We needed to have, in addition to food, socio-economic support to the population. And so search began in how to help our Syrian visitors, whether they're refugees or not. And as a community media organization, we wanted to help. And it was quite difficult because the government was basically running these camps, and there was difficulty reaching the population. Also, we didn't have any kind of connection with the population. And so we started by seeking the training of some of the college-age students and refugees. And we made out a call for college-age refugees if they wanted to learn journalistic skills. And soon enough, we received a lot of applications, and we began a training process of how they can produce a radio show. And we wanted to use radio because radio is cheap, it's available, and people can listen to radio without having to pay for a newspaper or even for the internet. And we also wanted to make sure that we connected authentic voices. So we worked hard in getting actual Syrians to tell us stories about their lives. And we also began a series of investigative reports because we knew that there was a lot of problems, corruption and social problems. One of the first problems we discovered was that because there was no religious or legal presence in these refugee camps, there was many marriages that were happening what we call outside of the law. They basically signed a piece of paper, and they were literally undocumented marriages, and oftentimes the men took advantage of these the fact that they are not committed through documentation, and took advantage of these women, and soon thereafter they left them without really having any responsibility of what they left behind. So we did a documentary investigation on this, and we also had a problem with work permits, and people were paying money, and there was a big corruption scandal going on with people paying money to get work permits because the Jordanian government wasn't working. But the radio program training continued for a while, and we finally decided to start a daily radio show called Syrians Amongst Us. And one of the reasons we decided to do this is because we discovered that some of the radio stations were using the Syrian refugees as a whipping horse to attack Syrians, to use it for hate speech. So there was a lot of attacks against Syrians. They're saying, oh, they brought the rent up in the houses, or they're causing a lot of traffic jams, or things like that that made no sense, because they actually improved the economy of Jordan, because many people were working and getting a lot of financial aid from international agencies. But there was a lot of hate speech on some of the radio stations. So we wanted to counter this hate speech, and we thought the best way to do that is to have the Syrian people themselves talk about their issues. And so we began Syrians Amongst Us as a radio program. And the radio program, what we tried to do is we created a coupling. We had the Syrian and the Jordanian work together. And we thought, because once a Syrian would call an official, because they are refugees, their status is not clear, the officials would just hang up on them. And so having a Jordanian do the calls for getting comments and so on allowed us to have both sides of any story. And we broke many really interesting stories that resulted in improvements and changes in the lives of the Syrians. To be honest, the US government was among the first donors for this project. But when Donald Trump came into power, that funding stopped, and we decided to continue producing this program on our own. Every now and then we were able to receive some funding. The World Association is kind enough to also be among the current funders. But we continue to find a problem in that Syrian refugees, probably like refugees around the world, have no voice. They have no elected representatives. Nobody asks their opinion. Lots of international organizations think they know what the refugees want, and nobody asks the refugees themselves. And so having a radio program in which Syrian refugees were able to speak about their problems, to tell themselves about their issues, give the priority to the issues that they're interested in, not what the donor agencies were interested in, I think gave a genuine, authentic voice. And we had, we've had a very good run with this project in 3 areas. We were able to
Thank you, Daoud. If you'll allow me, let's save the focus on the 3 areas for later on, because we'll have enough time for questions and answers, as well as from the audience. We'll move on to the next panelist, and we'll get back to you afterwards, Daoud. So please hold that thought. Next, we'll be hearing from our colleague Maria Teresa, who works with an organization called Coordinadora, which is the national network of community radio stations in Ecuador. And Coordinadora has been implementing a very interesting project in the Colombia-Ecuador border, which has seen thousands of Venezuelan migrants crossing. It's a pendular migration. Maria Teresa will be telling us a little bit more about their project to use community radio and citizen journalism to meet local communication and information needs among migrants and host communities. So I'll hand it over to you, María Teresa. Thank you.
Personas migrantes provenientes de Venezuela.
Gracias por la oportunidad.
Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Well, our organization in Ecuador carries out a project around communication. We work closely with communicators and journalists from Venezuela. I'll go straight to my presentation. Ecuador is a host, destination, and transit country. The right to migration is included in the Ecuadorian constitution, the possibility to migrate, to move to another country without being considered illegal because of this migratory condition is included in the constitution. And migration started to be a host country many years ago. In the 70s, we had migrants coming from Chile, Colombia, Cuba, Haiti, and currently Venezuela. Currently, there is also a heavy internal mobility due to socio-economical reasons. And yeah, as I said, also due to economic reasons. 5 years ago, Ecuador is receiving Venezuelan population. This exodus started 5 years ago, as I've said. They came walking or by bus, crossing the borders, crossing Latin American borders through Colombia, Ecuador, and moving, heading to other countries like Argentina, Brazil. Currently, we have around 400,000 Venezuelans in situations related to human mobility, and they are located in different areas of the country. More than 50% of these people are in an irregular situation. They have no working permits. Well, the situation of the Venezuelan migrants in Ecuador is very unclear. Sometimes they don't have dignified working opportunities. They face exploitation or poorly paid jobs, and also they face discrimination and racism, and also they are involved in cases of violence. Well, they've lost their livelihood, and due to the COVID-19 crisis, due to the lockdown, they weren't able to go to work. They weren't able to make a living, so they were not able to pay their rental, so they were evicted and ended up living in the streets. So this situation has provoked a part of the Venezuelan migrants have gone back to Venezuela in a worse situation than the one they were living when they came first to Ecuador. Well, we have asked journalists which is their views on migration, and they've said that they've seen that there is a social rejection towards Venezuelan migrant population because people think they take away jobs from the local community, or they don't contribute to the national economy. They generate poverty, they create crime, and there's very little acknowledgement of the cultural exchange between the Ecuadorian and Venezuelan population. Well, in this dialogue, in this conversation we had with the journalists in the northern border of Ecuador, which are organized in a journalist network, we could find out that the needs of migrant population are related to training and capacity development, also related to social issues such as migration, gender issues, and human rights issues. They also care for safety and security. Access to information is another problem they point out. And what we're doing with our project is try to contribute to the lives of people and create environments of education, training with a gender perspective, a human rights perspective. And we try to give journalists the tools so that they can give information, the appropriate treatment, and by using digital formats and new digital strategies, also dealing with security. And we are trying to strengthen this work because all these needs and problems they are facing now are related to human mobility and the COVID crisis. Well, in our next slide, please, could you move on with these slides? Well, we have developed some activities. We have developed an online workshop on investigative journalism and also a workshop on safety. Please, next slide. Well, yeah, here I already talked about our main goal. And yeah, well, our lessons learned are next slide, please. Well, I just want to underline that we want to work with communicators and journalists that create or that belong to this network. So here you see the activities I already mentioned that we are going to carry out throughout this process. This is the work we're going to do with journalists.
Maria-Teresa, I propose because we'll have time to get back to all these questions about the specifics of the project that you're carrying out. Okay. We will have a moment to talk about best practices and learnings. So if you can just put that in the parking lot to come back to it, we will have time for it. So first of all, thank you for this fascinating sharing about what's happening in Ecuador. Next, we'll go to Mexico. We're going to hear about a project being implemented primarily in Mexico City, Mexico State, but also in surrounding states in Mexico to meet the communication rights and advance the communication rights of primarily Central American migrants. And we'll be hearing from Pia, who works with an organization called Sandía Digital in Mexico City, and she will be telling us about some of the work. But before that, we'll be showing a video, about 3-4 minutes, that will tell us a little bit more about the context in Mexico and Central America related to migration. So if we can please go ahead and run the video.
Somos un planeta de migraciones. Migra la mariposa monarca.
We are a planet of migrations.
We
are a planet of migrations.
Y de ahí al centro de México para pasar el invierno en los templados bosques de Oyamel. Lo mismo hace la ballena azul desde Alaska, pasando por Canadá hacia el norte de Estados Unidos y de ahí a Baja California. Y nosotros los seres humanos hemos emigrado desde siempre. Actualmente, más de 272 millones de personas viven fuera de su país de origen. Cada vez más gente migra de manera forzada de lugares donde no encuentran condiciones de vida dignas y seguras. Muchos migrantes entran a México huyendo de la violencia y el despojo para salvar su vida y la de sus seres queridos. También llegan personas mexicanas que fueron obligadas a regresar de Estados Unidos y ahora se sienten extranjeras en su propio país. Los y las migrantes traen pedacitos de su terruño y nostalgia por su comunidad abandonada. pero también la esperanza de construir una vida mejor, compartiendo sus saberes y oficios. El viaje de los migrantes es largo y cansado. El cierre de las fronteras les obliga a tomar rutas muy peligrosas. Una vez en México, no solo se encuentran con barreras físicas, sino también legales y humanas. Muros de desconfianza y miedo que enfrentan todas las personas migrantes, solicitantes de asilo, refugiados, retornados o deportados. La migración no es un delito, no es un problema. La migración nos enriquece. Se dice que en México somos hospitalarios, amables y solidarios. Y que cuando alguien cae en desgracia, también sabemos acompañar y trabajar en conjunto, para despertar cada mañana con la satisfacción de contribuir a un mundo mejor. Construir, cocinar, educar, florecer, reconstruir. Hoy la historia nos hace una gran pregunta. ¿De qué lado queremos estar? ¿Del lado del miedo o de la solidaridad? ¿Y tú, de qué lado quieres estar?
Buenos días a todos y a todas. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today with us. And as you've seen in this video, I'll tell you later on how we did it. Well, Mexico has a very complex migratory context. It's both an exit country. Always Mexicans have migrated towards the United States due to economical reasons or due to violence. It's also a transit country. There are many Latin American migrants going through Mexico to go to other places. We also have other types of migration from Africa, from Asia, that want to reach the United States. But Mexico is also a destination country, and this is very important. We need to understand this because like Ecuador, Mexico has always been a host country. In the 80s, Mexico received the people from Guatemala fleeing the civil war. And what we do in our platform, we have created with our program called Migrant Voices, we want to work with people, victims of forced displacement that are seeking for international protection. There are also we also have people that want to stay here forever. They want to make a living, or they aim at approaching the United States at the short or long term. But the situation in the United States has become very difficult, and they need to stay much longer than expected in Mexico until they arrange all the things to move to the United States, and we accompany them during this time, this waiting time, until they can go to the United States. These refugees and these people that are seeking protection, they are expecting, or they are expecting to become a refugee card. There are more and more applications. it has increased 98% in comparison to last year. We have thousands of applications for refugee cards. And what's happening is that the number of applications that are conceded is only almost 20%. So mostly people from Honduras, Venezuela, and El Salvador receive these refugee cards, sometimes also from Cuba, Guatemala, and Haiti. And these forced displacement are caused by generalized violence, and also due to the lack of economic opportunities and training that are often linked to this violence. So in Mexico, we face a very big challenge to increase the number of refugee applications, and also to understand the complexity of these migrant flows, because the law in Mexico is not complete regarding refugee rights, and we need to include these people that come to Mexico due to economic or violence related causes. And also people, the general public are not aware of why people are migrating. And after the COVID-19 crisis, during the pandemic, the voices of refugees are being more and more silenced. We've done some documentaries, or we've seen some documentaries where their lives and histories are told, but they are represented in a way which is not real. They are shown as passive people that don't want to integrate in society. So, and they also depict them as military or a health risk, a health problem. And they are also represented as criminals in many narratives and in many media. So what we've seen is that it was high time to create a project in which the refugees themselves empower themselves and tell their stories, to stop the silence, and also to stop these racist and paternalist narratives that represent them as victims, as passive victims that are only waiting for aid and don't contribute to anything. So what we did is we created a project that we called the Dreams of Refugees, which is a series of podcasts created by refugees. The refugees themselves created the scripts and the contents of each one of these programs, and they talk about their experiences not from the perspective of a victim, but from the perspective of resilient people that are building a better and dignified life for themselves in Mexico. And by doing this, they are contributing with their skills, with their knowledge, with their abilities to the general good. And this is to facilitate the integration of these people in the Mexican society. So the most important thing in our project for us was that these people were able to create stories in a group, to create collective stories in order to point out the different profiles in migration. So we created youth groups, for example, because young people that are not accompanied and they come to Mexico without adults are more and more. And we also create women groups because they often don't have a voice in media, so that they could have the possibility to talk about their experiences. Also, we created a group of people who are fleeing because of gender-based reasons, and we have other groups and other types of programs.
It's been fascinating to hear all the commonalities between the work that you're all doing in your respective contexts. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing, and of course, thank you for your partnership with WACC. We now have a few minutes, about 6 minutes, for us to for you to quickly tell us in maybe 1 minute what you would think would be the the main best practice or the main learning you have derived from the project, keeping in mind that, for example, your project Pia is only getting started now because the pandemic delayed the start of many of these projects. So if you can maybe in just a minute tell us key lessons learned so far, and maybe can start with Daoud because you went first. Go ahead, Daoud.
So much. As I was saying, and the project allowed us to accomplish 3 goals. We provided training for the Syrian refugees to become journalists. Many of them have already started working in other media outlets. We also gave a platform for people to talk about their problems. And at the same time, we provided a small stipend for the refugees who were not getting any money. We had to kind of use the cover of expenses of travel and food and so on, because by law, they're not allowed to work. So we had to give them a stipend, and that allowed them to have some pocket money. But one of the biggest success we had was that when we published the investigative journalism report about the undocumented marriages, the government immediately brought in a religious leader and opened an office inside the Zaatari camp so people can register weddings, and therefore they had no excuse not to have a wedding registered. So we're quite happy that some of the stories that we published and broadcast actually produced really good results. We discovered an unknown refugee camp, and one of our journalists was driving on the streets, and so many of the Syrians living, and they had no support from any of the UN organizations. And so we filmed that and we put it on our radio show and on our website. And in a few days, the UN moved in and helped them. So we saw real action. People responded to the stories that we were presenting on radio and on our website. So we feel quite satisfied that the program by Syrians for Syrians actually brings results to their people.
Well, thank you, Daoud. That sounds incredible. And by the way, for anybody in the audience, you can ask us questions so we can send you more information and links to descriptions and best practices from each project. So thank you, Daoud. Now we'll go to Ecuador again, and we'll ask our friend Maria Teresa to tell us in just a minute what the best practices are stemming from your project. So go ahead, Maria Teresa.
Las mejores lecciones aprendidas de sus proyectos.
Bueno, la experiencia que hemos tenido
Well,
hasta el momento,
from our experience with communicators and journalists, is that we have these new modalities to socialize. Due to the pandemics, we have been obliged to have another kind of relationship, and we have taken profit of this. We have tried to have permanent sessions and just to be able to use this digital platforms and create capacities, create activities through these platforms. And this has been for all of us a new stage for facilitators, for communicators, for journalists. We all had to learn to use these new tools in order to take part in the workshops. And we had some situations where people collectively had access to internet. They gathered together to have access to internet.
Thank you, Maria Teresa. Yeah, I mean, especially that issue of working in rural areas and border regions. That's it's quite challenging, even with the technology that we have today. But we'll have a chance to go back to that question later on. Next we'll go back to Mexico to our friend Pia, and maybe Pia, you can tell us the best practices so far from your project.
de las mejores prácticas, por supuesto. Yeah, when we started our project, we had this methodology. We made groups of 3 people, and these 3 people created an episode in which they were storytelling. They were telling their stories. Sometimes, well, people meet in shelters, and they don't go out due to lockdown during the COVID-19 situation. And what we did for the first episode is that we saw that they were not willing to tell hard stories. They were not willing to tell traumatic stories. So they were the ones that decided what they wanted to talk about, the things that strengthened them, the things that empowered them in their past, in their home countries. They were experiencing hard times there, sometimes violence, gender-based violence, and some women experience hard times. And now they're here in a very difficult situation because they are waiting, they have no papers, but they have an idea of what they want to do. And in the case of the 3 people we were working with for our first episode, they have dreams. They have dreams we cannot even imagine as journalists, because we keep asking questions, very, very concrete questions. So the best thing was to have these creative scripts without a journalist interviewing them. They were freely telling their stories, telling about things that we
Yes,
as journalists would never ask.
To see at the ground, the grassroots level, when you really give people the opportunity to share their stories and the change that you can really see in people. So thank you for that. And next we go to the next session, which is a question and answer period. But this one will be moderated by the good friends in Bonn at the Deutsche Welle Akademie's studio. So I'll hand it back to you now.
Thanks a lot for handling that fruitful discussion for us. That was Lorenzo Vargas, Program Manager, and his team at the World Association for Christian Communication. I think I took a lot away, but I'll give the chance for most people to ask their questions because there are indeed quite a number coming through the app. Wanjiku?
That's right, indeed. And we are at the point we have been promising. Time to have your questions answered. And without spending any more time, our first question is from Alphonsine Niyigena, who asks, how do local media cover migrant issues?
Who is this question to?
It's to the whole pack, so anyone can jump on it, I think.
I'll start by saying that migrant problems are usually low, very, very low on the media scale. The local media does not really pay attention to migrant issues, and often regional and international media is more interested in migrant issues because it's a political story for an international audience. In our case, we try to change this paradigm by paying more attention to the local issues and to the local needs of the refugees. And I think in that sense, we provided a service to the community and we provided a voice to the refugees. And I think we created the proper engagement that is required so that people know what is happening and to hold the government and even the donor agencies accountable for what they do, because there is at times some abuse even from donor countries and donor organizations. So we try to represent the voice of the people and give them a microphone to speak about their challenges, their desires, their aspirations, and the problems they're facing on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Perhaps we can also hear from the other countries as well, how local media is covering the refugee stories. María.
Medios de comunicación locales están hablando sobre la situación de los migrantes. Well, here in Mexico, what we've seen is similar to what happens in Jordan. The representation of migration in the local media is very low. If there's not a big phenomenon that can raise the interest of big media, and then they can sell something by publishing this story. So some years ago, we had these very big migrant flows to the United States. But through the COVID-19 crisis and all the security measures and closing of borders, these big human movements stopped until October. In October, we saw the first big flow of people from Honduras. So these migration stories were not selling, were not interesting for mainstream media. Only when they started to publish rumors and uninformed stories about danger. 30% of people arriving in this migration flow could be sick of COVID-19. So these were the kind of stories that they were publishing when a new migration flow was about to arrive. So these titles and these catchy titles contribute to official declarations and to official statements when the minister or the president of the Mexican the Mexican president make mention to these issues, but there are no thorough documentaries that shed light on these stories. But yeah, there are many refugees living in Mexico, and they could have their voices in a documentary and tell the truth. There are many people living in open shelters in the north or in the northern or in the southern border, but there are no significant documentaries about them in Mexico.
For that answer. Now, there's another question coming in from Tonmoy Nath, who says, so this is the question. As the project is for locals and migrants, how do you maintain the relationship with local politics during conflicts? Again, anyone can jump on.
Yeah, perhaps I can jump in with that, and I know that Maria Teresa will want to speak to this as well.
Por supuesto. Muchas gracias.
If you want, let me, Maria Teresa, déjeme hablar yo,
Sí.
responde esta pregunta y te la traduzco. So, what I can say from experiences that we've had as a WACC around the world is that, of course, it's very easy for migration to be instrumentalized or politicized or instrumentalized for political purposes. So it's always a challenge. And of course, when you're giving microphones and video cameras to migrants and people on the streets, it's really hard to control the message and what can happen and how things could be misinterpreted in different ways. One thing that we have found that typically works and enables us to stay on track keep the focus on human rights and migration is the issue of culture. So we try and always go back to the issue of intercultural dialogue, culture as something that builds bridges between peoples and culture. So, for example, we've seen programs that produce a lot of content on shared music between host communities and migrant communities, or shared food and so on. And that can be, of course, the purpose is not just to speak about the food, but it's a gateway question that allows us to address migration issues from a rights perspective without falling into the political element. But if you want, I'll quickly translate the translation for the question for María Teresa, because she's not, I think that her translation app is not quite working.
Sí.
María Teresa, la pregunta es, ¿cómo, teniendo en cuenta que es un tema tan político y tan sensible políticamente, cómo manejan ustedes ese tema en el Ecuador?
Sí, yo creo que tú apuntas bien cuando señalas.
I think you're right when you said that the issue of interculturality and solidarity is very important. It's a thing that join us. So we have, we've seen we have very positive experiences about hosting, but we have also heard the opposite stories that are depicted in the mainstream media. But I want to underline the treatment in local media of migrants. So local journalists work sometimes closely with everyday life of migrants. They go to the grassroots level and they gather stories. And these reports they do enable to generate a more tolerant coexistence and to improve the situation of the people, of migrants living in Ecuador.
Yes, I do have a question here, and I want to direct it to Daoud. It's from Philip Lee, who asks, when journalists offer negative perceptions, are they simply reporting public opinion, or are they following some kind of editorial policy? What can be done to change this situation? And the reason I'm focusing first on Daoud is because you mentioned that you train this college level refugees into journalism. So how do you navigate this situation that Philip Lee, supported by Muthi as well, in this situation?
Thank you for the question. It's a very important question. And it's a problem we have all over the Middle East and other parts of the third world, which we call self-censorship, whereas a journalist starts to think what the government wants and tries to keep away from topics that might be controversial. What I like to do is to try to uproot the self-censorship from the head of the journalist and tell them they could write anything they want on one condition, that it has to be truthful and they have to get both sides. If the facts are there and if they get both sides of the story, then I don't care what the topic is, we will cover it. And so it takes time to convince journalists to go after the truth and not to worry about the consequences. Of course, the refugee population, especially those who came from Syria, have been traumatized because of their representing their voice and their point of view. And so it took a long time to convince them that they have freedom to say what they want, as long as it was truthful and as long as they got the second point of view. That's why we try to couple them with the Jordanian journalists, so that if they need to get a comment from the government officials or from a UN agency, they would use their colleagues. But it is a problem that sometimes journalists try to put their finger to feel where the wind is blowing so that they can represent what they think people want to hear. But I'm totally against the self-censorship.
Thank you so much for your response. Yes, please. Someone wanted to add something?
Seems like that's about it.
I thought I had someone. Thank you so much to the panelists and to you for your great participation. As you can already guess, yes, we are coming to the end of our discussion for today and the conference as well. To today's panelists, a very special thank you for joining us across the 3 or 4 countries across the world. Thank you for being here and answering these questions. Please remember, we still have the app, and anyone who has a question can send their questions to the experts. Like we said, it's not over yet, just the conference is over, but the conversation continues. You have been a lovely audience. We say goodbye one last time, but don't forget you can rewatch all the sessions on our conference app and get in touch with the speakers and participants. And if this conference has reminded us of one thing, it is the importance of talking and listening to each other. So get connected, find new possible partners for your organizations, and learn from each other.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely have a lot still to learn from all the experts on the app. So Wanjiku said it's a sort of a goodbye, but not exactly goodbye because we can still connect on that app. Okay, this is the second time we've had such a conference, but it is the first time in the virtual space. You guys have been with us from day one. You know how we started, you know how we're ending stronger than ever. Hopefully next year we can invite you to Bonn, hopefully physically. If that doesn't work out, you know, virtual also works. Okay, until then, all you have to do is mainly two things: stay healthy and take care of yourselves, right? I am Eddie Micah Jr. It's been a great pleasure being with you guys.
And my name is Wanjiku Mora. Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.